I thought I have to get my side into this too. They got me interested in trying it out, and the first time out, it worked. I called, it doesn't work anymore, and there's no address I can write to, so I have no way of contacting my daughter.
What would Markle like to say?
Thomas Markle just dropped something that's got royal watchers losing their minds. He's saying, the official story about his daughter doesn't match what he actually remembers. And here's the wild part. There's this old magazine sitting in archives from 1997 that lists a number next to Meghan's name, and when you do the math, it's off by 6 years. 6 years. That's not a typo. That's not a mix-up. That's a whole different timeline. And if that's true, it raises questions about everything we've been told. Her Hollywood career when she met Harry, even how the royal births went down. Because the numbers don't just affect her age, they affect the entire story. So buckle up, because what you're about to hear doesn't quite match up with the fairy tale version. Before we get into this, hit that like button and subscribe with notifications on, because what I'm about to show you is going to blow your mind, the details we're diving into. They've been sitting there all along, just waiting for someone to connect them. All right, let's break this down. So let's talk about Thomas Markle for a second.
A scandal nobody saw coming. What if the headlines you've been scrolling through missed the juiciest, most explosive?
When most dads talk about their daughters, there's this warmth, this pride in their voice, right? They light up talking about accomplishments, they brag a little, they get nostalgic. But when Thomas talks about Meghan, there's something different going on. It's heavier, it's more measured, like he's a guy who's trying to set the record straight before it's too late, before the narrative gets so cemented that nobody questions it anymore. He remembers her childhood clearly, all the theater, the ambition, that unstoppable drive she always had. She wasn't the kind of kid who sat back and waited for things to happen. She went after what she wanted. And as her father, he watched all of it unfold. He was there for the school plays, the graduations, the moments that shape a person's timeline. But here's where it gets interesting. When Meghan blew up and became this massive public figure, when she went from actress to duchess overnight, Thomas started noticing something weird. The stories she was telling publicly about her timeline didn't quite match up with what he remembered.
Or is there more to the story than we've been told? Stay with us as we uncover the explosive truth behind Thomas.
We're talking about basic stuff here. When she graduated, when she started acting, how old she was when she landed her first big role. These aren't vague memories you might mix up. These are concrete milestones that parents tend to remember pretty clearly. And according to Thomas, the public version wasn't lining up with the version he lived through. The numbers were off, the dates didn't fit. It was like watching someone tell a story about your own family and realizing halfway through that they're getting major details wrong. Now, here's the thing, and this is important. He's not some random person speculating from the sidelines. He's not a royal commentator pulling theories out of thin air. He's not going off tabloid headlines or internet gossip boards. This is the guy who held her baby photos in his hands. He was there for the actual milestones, the real dates, the birthday parties, the first day of school pictures. These aren't things he needs to Google or fact check. He lived them.
I'm delighted to cross to Rosarito, Mexico, where we're joined by our friend, Thomas Markle, the father of the...
So when he starts saying things like the timeline doesn't fit, when he hints that maybe she wasn't as young as the world was told she was, when he suggests that her official birth year might have been adjusted somewhere along the way, those words hit differently. They're not random claims from a stranger. They're observations from someone who doesn't need to guess about his daughter's age because he was actually there the day she was born. He's speaking slowly, carefully, almost like he's choosing every single word with precision. And that careful delivery, that makes it sound less like gossip and more like someone who knows exactly what they're saying and why it matters. When Thomas mentioned that the Meghan he raised, the timeline he remembered living through with her, didn't quite match the timeline the public was being shown, it was the first real crack in the perfect public story. Because at the end of the day, you can dismiss a lot of rumors. You can write off speculation. But it's a lot harder to dismiss a father who's saying, wait a minute, that's not how I remember it.
Scene look at Meghan Markle this Sunday, featuring an extraordinary message from her family.
All right, so now we're going to talk about a magazine, and I know that sounds random, but stay with me because this is where things get really interesting. We're going back to March 1997, 17 magazine. You know, that glossy teen magazine that every high school girl had on their nightstand back in the day. It was the go-to for fashion tips, celebrity crushes, college advice, all that stuff. And buried deep inside the March 1997 issue on page 90, there's this list of names, just young, aspiring people hoping to make it big someday. One of those names, Meghan Markle, age 21. Now, at first glance, you'd scroll right past it. It's just another entry in a long list of hopefuls trying to break into the industry. Nothing crazy, nothing that screams, pay attention to this. But here's where it gets wild. Let's do some quick math together. If Meghan was really born on August 4th, 1981, like all the official bios say, then in March of 1997, she would have been 15 years old, 15.
She just woke up one day in a new world and decided that she doesn't have any family.
I believe she had a clue.
Not 21. That's a 6-year gap we're talking about here. And this isn't some typo where they accidentally hit the wrong key. This isn't a rounding error or a close enough situation. This is a full, entire 6 years of difference between what that magazine printed and what the official record claims. And here's what makes this so fascinating. This wasn't some random blog post from the early internet days that could have been edited or scrubbed later. This was physically printed on paper, distributed to stores nationwide, sold on magazine racks across America. We're talking about a publication that went through editors, fact checkers, layout designers. It was archived in libraries. People bought it, read it, kept it, and that page 90, it's still there. You could go find an old copy right now if you wanted to, and that number would still be staring back at you, 21 years old, March 1997. So what does that actually mean if it's accurate?
The father that won't back down. Once a devoted father who proudly supported his daughter's right.
Well, let's think about it. If that magazine got it right, then the whole foundation of Meghan's story shifts dramatically. She wasn't this fresh-faced 20-something chasing her Hollywood dreams when she started acting. She was pushing 30. She wasn't the young ingenue breaking into an industry that worships youth. She was already a grown woman, fully formed, trying to navigate a business that typically chews people up and spits them out by that age. It completely changes the narrative. And look, I get it. Magazines make mistakes sometimes, but this wasn't a caption under a photo. This was a printed list with names and ages, the kind of thing that would have been submitted by the people themselves or their representatives. It's the kind of detail that would have come from somewhere official. So either someone at 17 magazine just randomly made up an age for Meghan Markle back in 1997, or the number they printed was what they were given at the time.
I'm delighted to cross to Rosarito, Mexico, where we're joined by our friend, Thomas Markle, the father of the...
And if they were given that number, if 21 was what was being reported back then where exactly did the 1981 birth year come from later? The thing is, this magazine came out decades before Meghan became a duchess, before she was even really famous, before anyone had a reason to dig through her history, looking for inconsistencies. It was just sitting there, archived and forgotten, like a time capsule nobody thought to open. But now that one little entry on page 90 doesn't seem to match up with what came later, it looks like a crack in what should have been a straightforward timeline, because if the math doesn't work, if that 6-year gap is real, then suddenly every date in Meghan's official story starts to look different. When did she actually graduate? How old was she really when she landed her first roles? And more importantly, how old was she when all the royal stuff started happening? That magazine's still out there, the ink hasn't faded, the number hasn't changed.
Now, E.T. is bringing you his biggest revelations from the documentary.
And it's sitting in direct contradiction to the official timeline we've all seen. So now we've got two completely different versions of the same person's timeline, and they can't both be right. Let's lay them out side by side so you can see exactly what we're dealing with here. Version 1, the official story. Meghan Markle, born August 4th, 1981 in Los Angeles, California. Do the math on that, and it makes her 44 years old in 2025. This is the version you'll find everywhere. It's in online biographies, press releases, and official statements. It's repeated so often that it's basically become fact in most people's minds. This is the timeline that's been established, documented, and widely accepted. It's the story everyone knows. But then there's version 2. And this one's based on that 17 magazine entry we just talked about. If Meghan was 21 years old in March 1997,
The royals owe me. Harry owes me. Meghan owes me.
Meghan Markle's estranged
then you've got to work backwards from there. That puts her birth year somewhere around 1975 or 1976. And if that's accurate, then she's not 44 today. She'd be pushing 50, maybe even past it, depending on exactly when in 75 or 76 she was born. That's not a minor difference. That's a significant chunk of time that completely reshapes how we understand her entire story. Now think about what that actually changes. We're not just talking about a number on a birth certificate. We're talking about her entire journey. If she was really born in the mid-70s, then how old was she when she graduated high school, when she went to college, when she started landing acting gigs and trying to make it in Hollywood? Every single milestone shifts by 6 years. Her whole 20s, her whole 30s, they all move forward on the calendar. And suddenly, the image of this young actress working her way up doesn't quite look the same anymore.
All right, so we know that the UK media is desperately unserious.
Here's where it really matters, though. When Meghan met Prince Harry and their relationship became public, the public story was that she was this 36-year-old actress at the peak of her career, stepping into royal life. That was the narrative. A successful woman in her mid-30s finding love and becoming part of one of the most famous families in the world. It was modern, it was relatable, it fit the fairy tale perfectly. But if the magazine timeline is correct, if she was actually born in the mid-70s, then she wasn't a rising 36-year-old when she married into the family. She was in her early 40s, possibly even older, stepping into the most watched, most scrutinized family in the world. And look, I'm not saying one version is definitely right and the other is definitely wrong. What I'm saying is that these two timelines can't coexist. They're fundamentally incompatible. Either the 1981 birth year is accurate, and the magazine made a bizarre, inexplicable error back in 1997.
Because those pictures will sell forever.
And now the Markle patriarch says he's willing to do anything.
Or the magazine had the right information at the time and something changed later. There's no middle ground here. There's no, well, maybe both are kind of true. It's one or the other, and the 6-year gap between them is just sitting there, unexplained. The thing that makes this so hard to wrap your head around is that both versions exist in black and white. The official documents say one thing, the archived magazine says another. And there's no clear explanation for why they don't match up. It's not like one source is obviously unreliable or sketchy. We're talking about documented information from two different points in time, and they're telling two completely different stories about the same person. So which one do you believe? The version that's been officially established and repeated for years, or the version that was printed in a national magazine before she became famous? That's the question, isn't it? Because if you start pulling on this thread, if you start wondering which timeline is real,
all exposed. Meghan horrified as relative drops fatal evidence unmasks her biggest lie about her dad. In a shocking
then suddenly everything else becomes questionable too. How old was she really during all those major life moments? What does that mean for the rest of the public story? And more importantly, if this one fundamental detail about her age has two completely contradictory versions, what else might not line up the way we think it does? All right, so we've talked about the age discrepancy, the two conflicting timelines, all of that. But now we need to talk about something else that's been raising eyebrows, the birth of Archie. Because when you start looking at the details Harry shared in his book Spare, things get complicated period. And I'm not talking about typical birth story stuff. I'm talking about a timeline that medical professionals can't quite make sense of. So here's what Harry wrote. According to his account, Meghan gave birth at Portland Hospital in London. He describes this really calm, serene setup. 2 epidurals to manage the pain, a peaceful environment, everything going smoothly. And then, according to the book, they were back home at Frogmore Cottage within 2 hours of the birth.
The arrival of a new baby is always a special time, and this past week there have been plenty of well wishes for Harry and Meghan.
2 hours from delivery to being home, settled in, everything done. That's the official version we got, and on the surface, it sounds like a beautiful, straightforward birth story. But here's where people who actually work in healthcare started scratching their heads, because when you break down that timeline, when you actually think about what would have to happen in those 2 hours, it doesn't quite work. And this isn't coming from random people on the internet. According to sources, there was an insider at Portland Hospital itself who said the details in Harry's book didn't line up with how things actually work in that facility, not even close. Let's start with the epidurals. Harry mentions 2 of them. Now, if you've ever had an epidural or know someone who has, they're not something you just stack up like taking 2 aspirin. That's not how they work. An epidural is a continuous thing. They insert a catheter into your spine and the medication flows through it over time.
Well, hello. I'm sorry. I didn't watch the Markle.
It's one continuous dose that they can adjust as needed, not something you do twice. Doctors who read that detail were immediately confused because medically having 2 separate epidurals during one birth just doesn't make sense. It's not standard procedure. It's not even really a thing that happens. So right off the bat, that part of the story raised questions. But let's say we put that aside for a second. Let's talk about the 2-hour window. Harry says they went from delivery to being back home at Frogmore Cottage in 2 hours. Okay, so let's map that out. The drive from Portland Hospital to Frogmore Cottage, depending on traffic, takes roughly an hour. Sometimes a little less, sometimes a little more, but let's call it an hour to be generous. That means everything else. The actual delivery, the recovery time, the observation period, getting cleaned up, getting discharged, all the paperwork, packing up, getting to the car, all of that would have to fit into the remaining hour.
In tell-all TV interviews. On the Markle side of the family, though, Lilibet's granddad, Thomas, remains
1 hour for everything. Now here's the thing about epidurals, and this is something anyone who's had one can tell you. You can't just walk out of the hospital right after. You have to wait for the medication to wear off. Your legs are numb. You can't feel anything from the waist down for a while. You need time for sensation to come back, for your blood pressure to stabilize, for your body to start functioning normally again. Hospitals have protocols for this, and they take that seriously. You could fall, you could have complications, all kinds of things could go wrong. So if Meghan had an epidural or 2, according to Harry's account, she would have needed time to recover from that before she could even think about leaving. We're talking at least a couple hours, usually more, just for the anesthesia effects, to wear off enough that walking is even possible. And that's under ideal conditions, with no complications, everything going perfectly. But if they really left within 2 hours total, that recovery time doesn't exist in the timeline. It's just not there. And then there's another piece.
You thought you knew Meghan Markle, but what if everything you thought about her was a lie?
That makes this even more complicated. According to various reports and Harry's own hints in the book, Meghan was dealing with high blood pressure during the pregnancy. Some sources even suggested early signs of preeclampsia, which is a serious pregnancy complication. Now, I'm not a doctor, but even basic research will tell you that if a mother is showing any signs of high blood pressure issues or preeclampsia, hospitals don't just wave goodbye after 2 hours. They keep you under observation. They monitor your vitals closely. They make sure everything's stable before you go anywhere. It's not optional. It's the standard medical protocol for high-risk situations. Portland Hospital isn't some small clinic. It's a private hospital known for handling high-profile births. They have protocols, procedures, standards they follow. So the idea that they'd let a new mother with potential blood pressure complications leave 2 hours after delivery, still recovering from an epidural, just doesn't match up with how these places operate.
In a jaw-dropping moment, in a shocking turn of events, Thomas Markle, the arranged father of Meghan Markle, has allegedly...
It's not about being overcautious. It's about basic medical care and safety standards that every hospital has to follow. The timeline Harry described, as lovely and peaceful as it sounds, is the kind of thing that sounds perfect on paper, but doesn't quite match medical reality. Because when you line it up against medical reality, against what doctors say is standard procedure, against the basic facts of how epidurals work and how long recovery takes, it just doesn't fit together. Medical professionals who've analyzed this timeline say it doesn't align with standard procedures. Not unlikely. Not maybe if everything went perfectly. It just doesn't match up with how things typically work. And look, I get it. Birth stories can be messy. Details can get fuzzy. Maybe Harry didn't remember the exact timing, or maybe he simplified things for the book. That's possible. But these aren't small details we're talking about. These are fundamental pieces of the story.
To be honest with you, I love both my daughters. I'm not happy with what one of my daughters is doing.
The type of pain relief used, how long they stayed at the hospital, whether there were complications that required monitoring, these are the kind of details that shape the entire narrative of what happened that day. And when those details don't match up with basic medical facts, it makes you wonder what actually happened that day. Okay, so now we need to talk about something that makes the whole birth story even more puzzling: the actual medical classification of Meghan's pregnancy. Here's the thing. Meghan's pregnancy with Archie was classified as what doctors call geriatric. And I know that sounds harsh, but it's literally just the medical term for pregnant women who are 35 or older. It's a clinical classification, not a judgment. And it exists because pregnancies over 35 carry different risks and require closer monitoring. Higher risk of complications, higher chance of gestational diabetes or blood pressure issues.
Sent a letter as well.
I mean, what seems extraordinary is you've still never met Prince Harry, right? The man...
All of that goes up once you hit that 35-year mark. So what does that mean? Tighter monitoring throughout the pregnancy, more frequent checkups, more tests, and when it comes time for delivery, it means full-time medical supervision. Hospitals follow protocols designed to catch any problems before they become serious. Now, keeping that in mind, let's go back to Harry's description of Archie's birth. He paints this picture of a really calm, almost spa-like environment, birthing balls, candles creating this peaceful atmosphere, a water tub, all these wellness elements. And look, I'm all for making birth as comfortable as possible, but here's where medical professionals started raising their eyebrows. That whole setup, the birthing ball, the candles, the relaxed wellness vibe. That's not how high-risk births are typically handled at a place like Portland Hospital. When a pregnancy is flagged as high risk, when you're dealing with a mother over 35 who might have complications...
In a shocking turn of events, Thomas Markle, Meghan's own father, has stepped forward with claims that could tear
the setup looks very different. You're not talking about mood lighting and birthing balls. You're talking about monitoring equipment, medical staff on standby, everything positioned to respond quickly if something goes wrong. That's them following the protocols that exist specifically for high-risk situations. Portland Hospital isn't some laid-back birthing center. It's a facility that handles high-profile, high-risk births regularly. They've got protocols they have to follow. So the idea that they would approve a spa-like wellness setup for a geriatric pregnancy with all the risks that classification carries, it doesn't match up with how these hospitals operate. Comfort has to work within the boundaries of safety protocols, especially when there are known risk factors involved. Here's what really stood out. When you've got a mother who's classified as high risk, the medical team doesn't step back and let things unfold naturally with minimal intervention.
Helped her navigate her biracial activity. He also supported Meghan financially.
They're present, monitoring, with equipment tracking heart rates, blood pressure, contractions, all of it. The room doesn't look like a wellness retreat. It looks like a hospital delivery room, because that's what it is. Now, maybe some of those elements were there. Maybe they did have candles or a birthing ball in the room as comfort items while still maintaining all the medical monitoring. That's possible. But the way it's described in the book makes it sound like this peaceful, minimally medical experience, and that's where the disconnect happens. Because if Meghan was truly being monitored as closely as a high-risk pregnancy requires, the experience would have been a lot more medical and a lot less spa-like than what's described in the book. And remember, this isn't even getting into the preeclampsia concerns that were mentioned. If there were genuine worries about blood pressure complications, which fall under some of the most serious risks a pregnant woman can face, then that wellness retreat setup becomes even harder to understand.
This revelation has been described as a devastating betrayal, and it has the potential to turn everything we thought we knew about the
High blood pressure during pregnancy requires constant monitoring, medical intervention when needed, and a team ready to act fast if things take a turn. So when you put it all together, the geriatric pregnancy classification, the potential blood pressure issues, the hospital's standard protocols, and then compare all of that to the serene, spa-like birth story that's been shared, there's a gap. The medical reality and the described experience don't quite line up. And that gap is big enough that healthcare professionals who know how these things work can't help but notice it. All right, so we've talked about the timeline issues, the high-risk pregnancy classification, and now we need to address what might be the most significant medical puzzle in this entire story, preeclampsia. And if you've never heard that word before, buckle up, because this is where things get really serious from a medical standpoint. Preeclampsia is one of those pregnancy complications that doctors take extremely seriously. It's a condition where a pregnant woman develops high blood pressure and often protein in her urine.
Speak to you. Meghan turned 40 last week. Is it true that you sent...
And it can escalate really quickly if it's not managed properly. We're talking about a complication that can lead to seizures, organ damage, and in severe cases, become life-threatening for both mother and baby. When preeclampsia shows up, the whole approach to the pregnancy changes immediately. Now, according to various reports and hints that Harry dropped in his book, there were concerns about Meghan having high blood pressure during the pregnancy, and some sources even suggested early signs of preeclampsia. I'm not a doctor, so I can't diagnose anyone. But what I can tell you is what the standard medical response to preeclampsia looks like. And once you understand that, the 2-hour hospital turnaround becomes even more impossible to wrap your head around. So let's talk about what actually happens when a woman has preeclampsia and goes into labor. First off, the treatment is intense. We're talking about IV drips of magnesium sulfate.
Every day there was another humiliating photo in the papers. Thomas Markle buying a new loo. Thomas Markle buying a six-pack.
Which is used to prevent seizures. If you've ever talked to someone who's been on a magnesium drip, they'll tell you it makes you feel hot, sluggish, out of it. Your muscles feel weak. You're not hopping up and walking around anytime soon. And they keep you on it during labor and usually for at least 24 hours after delivery to make sure you're stable. Then there's the blood pressure monitoring. When preeclampsia is in the picture, they're watching it constantly. Monitors attached to you throughout labor and delivery. Nurses checking your vitals every few minutes. Doctors keeping a close eye on any spikes or drops. The whole medical team is on high alert because blood pressure can spike dangerously fast with this condition. This is not a light some candles and relax situation. This is a full medical operation. And here's the kicker. After delivery, the monitoring doesn't just stop. Preeclampsia can actually get worse after the baby's born.
Thomas Markle, he's due to turn 80 next year, and as we know, he's not been a well man recently, and indeed it was a brush with death.
So hospitals keep women with preeclampsia under observation for at least 24 to 48 hours, sometimes longer, watching for any signs that the condition is worsening. That's standard medical protocol when dealing with a condition this serious. Now let's circle back to Harry's account. 2-hour turnaround from delivery to being home, scented candles, a peaceful, spa-like environment. You see the problem, right? If Meghan really was showing signs of preeclampsia, if there were genuine concerns about high blood pressure complications, then literally none of that makes sense medically. You can't be on a magnesium drip and walk out of a hospital 2 hours later. You can't have preeclampsia requiring intensive monitoring and also have a candlelit wellness birth experience. Let me put it this way. When a woman has preeclampsia, the delivery room is full of people and equipment. There's the OB team, anesthesiologists, nurses, monitoring equipment everywhere.
Being watched by the entire world. Everybody was watching my daughter. I disagree, of course, and she might even sue me. I don't care.
IV lines, probably a neonatal team on standby just in case the atmosphere is focused and medical because the stakes are high. They're trying to keep both mother and baby alive and healthy through a genuinely dangerous complication. The idea that this kind of high-stakes medical situation could be described as peaceful and spa-like is really hard to reconcile. After delivering with preeclampsia, women are exhausted. Between the blood pressure issues, the magnesium treatment making them feel awful, the stress their body's been under, and the actual delivery itself, they're wiped out. The recovery is measured in days, not hours. So when you line all of this up, the magnesium treatment protocol, the constant blood pressure monitoring, the extended observation period, the intensive medical environment, the difficult recovery, and then you look at the story of a 2-hour hospital stay ending with a peaceful return home, the gap between medical reality and the described experience is significant.
Attempts, even via a third party, to see how you were doing?
To my knowledge,
It's a fundamental incompatibility between what preeclampsia treatment looks like and what we're told happened. Here's what makes this particularly puzzling. Harry had access to the best medical information available. He was there, presumably talking to doctors, understanding what was happening. So either the medical details in his book are simplified or altered for storytelling purposes, or the actual medical situation may have been different from what's been publicly described. Because if you ask any OB, any labor and delivery nurse, anyone who's actually dealt with preeclampsia in a hospital setting, they'll tell you the same thing. The scenario as described doesn't align with how preeclampsia is actually treated. And look, I get that not every medical detail needs to be in a memoir. People simplify things, they focus on the emotional experience rather than the clinical details. But preeclampsia is a major medical event. The treatment for it is intensive, specific.
Breaking news! Meghan Markle's brother breaks the silence in a live broadcast filled with shocking revelations, unmasking the Duchess of Sussex,
and follows protocols that exist for very good reasons. So when the story being told doesn't include any of those realities, when it describes something that sounds nothing like what actually happens in these situations, it raises questions about what parts of the story match the medical reality and what parts don't. So we've gone through a lot here. The magazine from 1997 with a completely different age listed, the two timelines that can't both be true, the birth story that doesn't quite align with how hospitals actually handle high-risk deliveries. And now we need to talk about why all of this actually matters. Let's start with Thomas Markle. He's been saying for a while now that things don't add up. Not in a loud, attention-seeking way, but in this quiet, persistent manner that makes you pay attention. He's talking about timelines that don't match his memories, ages that don't fit with what he remembers living through. And he's not some distant relative trying to remember fuzzy details. He's her father.
She shot me, and now she messages me.
I was like, I don't know why, but I don't believe him. Lost my dad in this.
He was there for the actual moments, the real dates, the milestones that matter. So when he says the numbers don't line up, that carries weight. Then you've got the hospital insider, someone who actually worked at Portland Hospital, who knows how that facility operates, who understands the protocols and procedures. And according to what's been reported, this insider looked at the details in Harry's book and basically said, that's not how things work here. That's two completely different people from completely different parts of this story, both pointing at gaps in the narrative. And between what Thomas is saying and what the hospital insider is saying, there's this unexplained gap where the official version of events and the observations from people who were actually there just don't quite meet in the middle. Now, I want to be really clear. I'm not sitting here saying I know exactly what happened or why the inconsistencies exist. What I'm saying is that there are inconsistencies, and they're big enough that they can't really
have announced the birth of their baby daughter.
Meet Lilibet's doting granddad.
No, not him.
Be ignored or explained away as simple mistakes, a 6-year age gap in print, a birth timeline that medical professionals say doesn't work. These aren't the kind of details that accidentally get muddled. So let's think about this from a different angle. When you're part of something as massive and scrutinized as being connected to one of the most famous families in the world, image becomes everything. Every photo is carefully planned. Every statement is carefully worded. Every public appearance is planned down to the minute. When the whole world is watching, you can't afford for things to look messy or inconsistent.
The documentary is so far off on so many different levels.
Everything has to be polished, perfect, fitting the narrative that's been established. And when you're building an image like that, when you're crafting a public story that needs to be flawless, sometimes the messy details get smoothed over in the process. Timelines might get adjusted. Ages might be presented differently. Birth stories that were complicated and medical get retold in a way that's more palatable, more magical, more fitting for the fairy tale everyone wants to believe. It's not necessarily malicious. It's just management. It's presenting the story in its best light. Think about it this way. If you were stepping into one of the most watched positions in the world, wouldn't there be pressure to make sure everything about your story fit the part? If your real age made you older than what the public expected, wouldn't there be a temptation to adjust that? If your birth experience was intense and medical and far from the perfect moment people wanted to hear about.
My granddaughter.
Before it's too late.
You want dirty laundry? First time I've discussed these things.
Wouldn't there be pressure to tell a cleaner version? I'm not saying that's definitely what happened, but when you look at all these pieces together, the age discrepancy, the medical impossibilities, the gaps between what people who were there remember and what the official story says, it starts to look less like random mistakes and more like a carefully managed image. An image where the messy, complicated details might not be fully included in favor of a version that's easier to present to the public. Maybe the story of Archie's birth emphasizes the peaceful, magical aspects rather than the full medical complexity of a high-risk delivery. Maybe the public timeline for Meghan's age presents the version that fits best with the narrative of a rising actress at the perfect stage of her career. Story focuses on the compelling fairy tale elements rather than the messier reality that doesn't photograph quite as well. And here's what's interesting. We're not talking about things that happened in secret where nobody can verify anything.
So this whole campaign that Meghan changed this whole commercial is not true.
We're talking about a magazine that's still sitting in archives, medical protocols that are publicly documented, a father's memories, and a hospital worker's professional knowledge. These aren't conspiracy theories or wild speculation. These are observable gaps between what should line up and what actually does. The thing is, once you start seeing these gaps, once you notice that the official version doesn't quite match the details that have been documented or remembered by the people who were actually there, it changes how you look at the whole story. Not because you want to tear anyone down, but because you start to wonder what else might not perfectly align with the documented details. And that's what this all comes down to. It's not about any single inconsistency. It's about a pattern of details that don't quite fit, stories that don't quite align with reality, timelines that seem more polished than the complex reality. And when you see that pattern clearly enough, when enough pieces don't fit together the way they're supposed to.
Or do you think that your relationship with them is effectively over?
You can't help but step back and look at the bigger picture differently. Because if the foundation of the story has cracks in it, then maybe the rest of it isn't quite as solid as we've been led to believe either. So here we are, we've walked through all of it. The magazine from 1997 sitting in archives with a number that doesn't match the official timeline, Thomas Markle saying the story he remembers doesn't line up with the story the world's been told. A birth account that medical professionals can't quite make sense of when you compare it to standard hospital procedures for high-risk pregnancies. And when you lay all these pieces out side by side, you're left with something that doesn't quite fit together the way a complete picture should. Look, I'm not here to tell you what to believe. I'm not sitting here claiming I've got all the answers or that I know exactly what happened behind closed doors. What I'm showing you is what's already out there, documented in magazines, explained by medical professionals, remembered by a father who was actually there. These aren't theories I'm pulling out of nowhere. These are gaps that exist between what we can verify and what we've been told. And those gaps, they're not small, they're significant enough that once you see them, they're pretty hard to unsee. The thing about image, especially when you're connected to something as watched and documented as one of the most famous
Meghan Markle's brother made shocking revelation about his sister Liv in front of thousands of viewers.
Meghan Markle trying to
families on Earth is that it requires consistency. Every detail has to line up. Every story has to make sense. Every timeline has to work. Because when you're operating at that level of public attention, inconsistencies don't just get overlooked. They get noticed. They get questioned. They become the cracks that people can't stop looking at once they spot them. And maybe that's what this all really comes down to. Not whether every single detail is perfectly accurate, because let's be honest, memory is complicated and stories get simplified and public narratives don't always capture every messy reality, but whether the public version of the story matches up enough with what can be independently verified. The magazine hasn't changed. The medical protocols haven't changed. Thomas Markle's memories haven't changed. What's changed is how all of those things look when you put them next to the official narrative and realize they don't quite align. So what do you do with that information?
Meghan Markle's half-brother, Thomas Markle Jr., didn't even know she had a half-brother, is writing a tell-all book about our Duchess behind her back.
That's up to you. Maybe you look at these gaps and think they're just normal inconsistencies that happen when stories get told and retold over time. Or maybe you look at them and start wondering what else might not line up if you looked close enough. Maybe you walk away from this thinking the official version still holds up fine, or maybe you walk away thinking there's more to the story than what's been made public. Either way is valid. I'm just here showing you what's there. But here's what I know for sure. That magazine from 1997 exists. The medical realities of high-risk pregnancies exist. Thomas Markle's account exists. And somewhere between all of those documented, verifiable things and the public story that's been shared, there's a space, a gap where things don't quite meet. And whether that gap matters to you or not, whether it changes how you see the whole situation or not, at least now you know it's there. Because once you see the pieces that don't quite fit,
Thomas reflects on the media's portrayal of Meghan as both victim and villain. He acknowledges that the truth is probably...
Once you notice the timeline that bends in places it shouldn't, you can't really look at the complete picture the same way again. And maybe that's the point. Maybe it's not about proving anything definitively or tearing down anyone's story. Maybe it's just about looking a little closer at what we accept as truth and asking ourselves whether it all really adds up the way we've been told it does. Because if a perfect story has too many imperfect details underneath it, then maybe the story isn't quite as perfect as it seemed at first glance. So there you have it. A magazine from 1997 that hasn't changed, a father's memories that don't match the official timeline, and a birth story that medical professionals can't quite reconcile. Make of it what you will. If this got you thinking, drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you make of all this. And if you want more deep dives like this, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.